hi everybody and welcome to BPD Update. I'm Steve Strand, I'm the Chief of Police for the City of Bremerton. If you watch our show, you know that it's all about what we're doing around the Bremerton Police Department and some good things for you to know involving our police department and our community. Got a good show for you this month. Of course, the second half we will go through some of the incidents and activities that have been going on around the police department, our statistics, which we do every month. But the first half, we're going to talk about Neighborhood Watch. And you may say, well, Neighborhood Watch, I've heard of that block watch, you know, been around a long time. Maybe you know a lot about it, maybe you don't. But it's changing a bit, and it's changing in a good way, and it's becoming even more effective. We have a really robust Neighborhood Watch program here in the city of Bremerton. We're very, very proud of it. And we are going to talk this month with Robin Henderson, who is a resident of Bremerton, a resident of the Manette area of Bremerton, and is active in Neighborhood Watch. And first of all, thank you, first of all, for being here, and welcome, Robin.
Thanks for having me, Chief.
You bet. So, again, people know what Neighborhood Watch is, but just sort of in a nutshell, talk a little bit about, you know, what it is, why your neighborhood became involved, and then if you can, talk a little bit about how it's changing.
Well, back in 2007, when the recession first hit, we saw kind of a downturn in our neighborhood, and we actually had a drug house move in just a couple houses down from me. It was really awful. And I went out to my neighbors and I tried to form a traditional block watch on our block. And unfortunately, people were scared and didn't want to get involved. And so it failed. But people were willing to give me their phone numbers and their email addresses. And we created a group called the Busybody Report. And it actually became a wider group than just our actual block. And it became very effective, and more people wanted to be involved. And now we have a group called the Manette Neighborhood Coalition, and we have a Facebook group that's become very popular, almost 2,000 members of that group. And we've kind of migrated our online Neighborhood Watch group onto the Facebook group, and it's been really a great way to encourage people to talk to their neighbors, share information, find out about resources like Joe and the Neighborhood Watch program, and from there we encourage neighbors to go ahead and create traditional block watches on their blocks.
And it's interesting, you know, how technology has changed things, and in a way technology, you know, it sort of, how do I say, isolates people. It can be accused of isolating people, but in many ways it's connected people much more, and including personal face-to-face contact. And you're talking, Robin, about how people are sort of, they're unwilling to be involved, they're a little bit scared, and having a drug house in a neighborhood or having an unruly house that's causing problems in a neighborhood, this has been going on forever. I mean, it's a problem in every city. We see this in the city of Bremerton, particularly as neighborhoods are, you know, getting fixed up and a lot of new people moving in, and they're sort of saying, hey, what's going on in that house is not okay. But back when I started in law enforcement during the Reagan administration, as I roll my eyes, but I've been doing this almost 30 years, is, you know, we used to do Operation ID years ago with those little sort of, what do they call it? You know, etching tools, you know, where you're supposed to write your Operation ID number on all your property in case it gets stolen. And we don't really do that anymore, because now we just tell people, take digital photos and put them in your phone and keep them somewhere in your hard drive so that you have photos with your serial numbers on there. Technology has made it much, much easier with photos. And in the same way, we did block watch years ago, and it was, the challenge was what you just described, which was, well, what do I need to do? I like to keep to myself. I don't want to get too involved with my neighbors. I'm a little scared, you know, do I have to stick my neck out? And we would try to work through that with people, and we put signs up that would say this is a neighborhood block watch area, and, you know, all the rest of those things. And it seems like social media has made it both easier and, just like Operation ID, more effective, and it brings people together, and that's what you're describing. So you mentioned it started as a Facebook page. It's expanded into sort of a different group. It morphs a little bit, and technology changes. But if a person lives in a neighborhood in Manette, particularly if they're involved in the group you're describing, what does it look like to them? I mean, what do they have access to? What kind of information do they get?
Well, we use a group on Facebook rather than a page. And the advantage of a group is that it allows people to be a member of the group, and they can make a post themselves. So if they've taken a picture of something going on in their neighborhood, a suspicious person, they can post that directly, versus a page where the moderator has to post that information. And one of the biggest things we do is to provide an answer to your problems. If you said, I've had this situation, rather than pointing them to a resource, there's actually people who are going to respond and say, hey, I had that problem, this is what we did.
Right.
And then we direct them to a resource that's going to work best for them. Now, we tell people, call 911. Even if you don't think it's an emergency, you can say, hey, this is an emergency, and they'll take your information. But people who don't want to do that, we direct them to Joe in the Neighborhood Watch program, the online reporting, nuisance reporting.
I was just going to mention it really strikes me how things have changed, and I think for the better. Going back again years ago, Neighborhood Block Watch, you had the sign, you had a community relations officer like our Joe Sexton, who's great, who would be involved and would lead the neighborhood and have meetings and those kind of things. But it's a time commitment. You have to show up at 7 p.m. on some night and everybody's busy. So it was a little bit of a challenge, but it was also, there's the police, there's the neighborhood. You know, call 911 if something happens. We will show up and we will deal with it. And we may or may not communicate well to the neighborhood what we did.
Right.
It was always a challenge, let's be honest. And now you've got this group that communicates with each other. And there's the 911 call, which is part of it. The community relations officer, which is part of it, but there's also the neighbors helping neighbors piece of this.
Well, there's a great story around that. We had a problem last year where a lady posted in the forum that she'd called 911 and then she didn't see anything. She didn't see any result of that, and I was able to get a hold of Joe and say, your report was received, the police did respond, and this is what happened. So it was able to answer that question for her and make her feel better about what happened.
And that's huge. I mean, that's not just a nice story. That's huge when somebody says, I don't know what happened, or the police response was not what I expected. And we're able to clarify that with the help of the neighborhood. That's a big deal. To people's feeling of safety and security. You had mentioned to me as well, Robin, a story about people going door to door, and there were sort of two different examples. And again, it's a great example of why information is so important. Can you tell me that story?
Well, we had a problem where we had some solicitors coming in, and they were selling, offering to sell Kirby vacuum cleaners. However, they didn't look very professional. They acted very aggressively, and people were upset. But they didn't think that was something to call the police about. Well, as it turns out, absolutely you should call the police about that, because they were not legitimate Kirby vacuum cleaner sellers, and they've been seen in other neighborhoods casing houses. And then conversely, we had a situation where two young men have been coming up and knocking on doors and asking for work, and some of the neighbors thought that they might be casing their houses, and as it turns out, they're actually two great local kids who are legitimately looking for some yard work. And we're able to communicate that to their neighbors so that they know when to report and when they hire them to do some yard work.
And again, what a great example. You know, we had these Kirby salespeople, and they were in Anderson Cove as well not long ago, and they don't have permits. I don't think they're from Kirby at all, and they're up to no good. And so, number one, to deal with it through law enforcement and communicate it to people so they know it's out there. And again, a great feeling of safety, security. And then here's two young men doing the right thing, looking for work. And the neighborhood can also become involved. And if I need something in my yard, I know it's out there. So really good outcomes. You're talking about Facebook, Robin, and that's the tool that is used in your neighborhood, and that's what what your group chooses to use. There's an app out there called Nextdoor that some people are familiar with, and there's probably other apps. It is what it is. People can use what they want to use. Is that accurate? Absolutely.
In fact, we actually have a Nextdoor group for Manette. The advantage that Nextdoor has is that it forces you to enter in your address and prove that you actually live in the neighborhood. One of the things that we do talk about with our social media page is that the bad guys could be paying attention too. But I don't mind, because I want them to know, pick another neighborhood. You don't want to mess around in our neighborhood.
And it really speaks to, and it gets fascinating, is seeing how law enforcement has evolved in my career. And I think one of the things that we could do better, I think we do a reasonable job here in the city of Bremerton, some departments do it really, really well, some don't do it at all, is to really respond to these changes. I mean, our society has changed because of social media, and you can say it's good or bad, and I think it's both. I mean, there's the element of anonymous, trolling and people going after each other and the negativity and, all the things that's led to. That's probably not a good thing, but participation, getting to know your neighbors, working together as a neighborhood. One of the negative aspects of it, and again, let's be frank, in the city of Seattle, they've had a lot of controversy over homeless people in certain neighborhoods in Seattle. And one of the comments made by the mayor and the chief there has been that those local social media groups and neighborhoods are, creating so much information amongst themselves that's one of the negative aspects. So it's all out there, but I would tell you that in Bremerton, what we're seeing is strong neighborhood groups that it's not just social media. We're talking a lot about social media, but it's neighbors themselves personal face-to-face interaction strengthened by social media to just share information appropriately and get the information out there so that people know what's going on in their neighborhood. And I think it's been generally very, very positive in our city. And if you can, number one, if you want to comment on that. Number two, how does it link with Neighborhood Watch? Because again, Neighborhood Watch is sort of traditional. This is new. How do those things go together?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, we still have that over the fence network. Okay, I have a retired Army veteran who worked for years as a gate guard at PSNS, and he walks his dog around the neighborhood all the time, and he is the eyes and ears in our neighborhood, and he is not on Facebook, and we communicate over the fence, okay?
Right.
And we have a neighborhood group in Manette called the Manette Neighborhood Coalition, which has been around for like 10 years, and there's a large email chain, and there's plenty of people who have email who aren't on social media. We still maintain that email chain to keep charge those people, and we host regular meetings in the community where people can show up. Joe comes to our meetings to talk about crime in the neighborhood, and we have the Facebook group, and we have the Nextdoor Manette group, and when the next thing comes along, we'll be sure to be on that, and it's all about keeping up with the times and knowing what's going to happen, and we share your weekly updates.
Our newsletter, which we are happy to have out there. Our BCAT show, this show is easy to link as well. So as we wrap up and before we finish, Robin, I'm going to ask you to mention a couple upcoming events in Manette, just because we have the opportunity and people are interested. But linking Neighborhood Watch with neighborhoods, people shouldn't be afraid of it. You can use social media. You don't have to. Neighborhood Watch is there, and you can make it whatever you choose to. I'm going to give you a quick number, which is the number to call Joe Sexton, our Community Resource Officer. It's 360-473-5231. Or you can go to our website, easy to access that information. And then would mention as well, we've talked a lot about BCAPS, our volunteer program. All these things are linked. Community Relations Officer, Neighborhood Watch, our officers, these neighborhood groups. If a neighborhood group says this is something going on or a problem for us, they communicate that with Joe. Joe gets our volunteers on it. They can check vacant houses. They can check suspicious houses. All those things are linked, and that's how you enhance safety and security and build those stronger neighborhoods. That is huge to us here in the city of Bremerton. And before I forget, Robin, I want to thank you and all of our Neighborhood Watch folks. You provide a huge service to our city, and you really help us out, and it certainly is an honor to work with all of you. So with that, a couple things in Manette coming up. Great neighborhood in our city. Great place to visit, great place to go and shop and eat, by the way. And before we leave, did you want to mention a couple of those?
I do. So I'm involved with the Manette Neighborhood Coalition and the Manette Business Association. We have several events coming up this year we'd like to invite everybody to come down and take advantage of.
And they're really fun, by the way.
Absolutely. Now we have a neat little park in Manette, the Manette Playfield, and on April 6th at 6 p.m. we're having a meeting to talk about improvements that the neighborhood is working to raise money to improve at our park. On May 7th at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, that's a Saturday at the Senior Center, we're having our annual neighborhood membership meeting. So if you're a neighbor or interested in the Manette Neighborhood Coalition, come on down to our meeting on Saturday, May 7th. Starting on July 7th, the Business Association will be hosting music in Manette at Whitey Domstead Park above the Boat Shed restaurant. That's live bands on Thursday nights. It's the same night as the farmers market. So come down, hit the farmers market, check out some music in Manette. In July, we'll have our neighborhood garage sale. August is the Manette Edible Garden Tour. September will be Manette Fest. We have our Harvest Festival in October. In December, Winterfest, Santa Claus and Light the Christmas Tree. Come on down and check out Manette.
And that's all there is.
You got it.
There's nothing else going on in Manette. Manette, like I said, great city, and Neighborhood Watch, these kind of events, farmers markets, these are the things that make a good city a great city. And again, I appreciate all of your help, and thanks for being a guest.
Thank you.
Thank you, Robin. We'll be right back after this. Again, if you're interested in Neighborhood Watch or have any questions, as always, call our Community Relations Officer, Joe Sexton. Again, his number is 360-473-5231, or just go to our website if you forget the number. Here's some statistics and some information from around our department. We do this every month, but again, I don't want to bore you with a bunch of numbers, but I do want to give you some numbers about trends and what's going on around the city. So these are the reports, as I take a look at our first slide here, from February of 2016. And what we do is we look at February for the last 3 years. So just the month of February from 14, 15, 16, you can see that those reports have been going up just a little bit. We went down for a couple of years. Now we're trending upward a little bit. And I explained this to the council. Reports are sort of an analog for activity. Doesn't mean crime, it just means activity. Generally speaking, reports going down is a good thing. But going up, I think, is indicative of just activity and being busy. It is noticeable over the last several months. I'm sure you've noticed it if you live in Bremerton. It's just busier. It's busier everywhere. The economy is up. There's more traffic. There's more commerce. There's more people moving around. And if you go to downtown Bremerton just about any time now, there's a lot more just people walking and traffic than there used to be. Generally speaking, a good thing. It's busier, but I think the fact that our reports are trending upward is just indicative or reflective of that. Our arrests were up substantially over last year in February of 2015, and I'll talk in a second about some of the reasons why that was. Domestic assaults up a little bit to 25. Domestic verbal incidents, so not physical assaults, but verbal domestic incidents, actually down a little bit, which is a good thing. Our DUIs were at 6 for the month of February of 2016, excuse me. Most of our DUIs, as I've explained before, are charged by the State Patrol. We hand them off to the State Patrol. They're sort of the subject matter experts. So the vast majority of our DUIs, those are the 6 that we handled ourselves. Robberies were at 4. Now, if a person is a victim of a robbery, that's a huge deal. That's a very serious felony. But 4 robberies for a city of our size is a very low number. We're pleased with that and want to keep that as low as we can. And then mental health calls, we had 21 that were purely mental health calls in February of 2016. Let's talk about those arrests. Those arrests were up from 158 to 210 for the month of February. Why is that? And we sort of broke these out to see where the increase was. You can see the domestic assaults were up over last year to 14. That's a personal crime between families and people living together. There's not a lot we can do about that. It occurs. It's situational. Failed to appear contempt of court went up 8 from last year to 53. So in other words, 53 of our 210 arrests were from court orders for failure to appear in court or contempt of court. 1/4 of our total arrests. That's a huge chunk. Protection order violations went from 1 to 5. Again, this is a violation of a court order. And then we also saw 10 arrests out of those 210 for escape from community custody. Most of those are warrants issued by the Department of Corrections for a person who has been under the supervision of the Department of Corrections and doesn't report in. So that's what those arrests are for. And you can see as well that robbery, our arrests for robbery were 3. So we had 4 robbery calls, 3 arrests, so a high clearance rate. And then our number of arrests for meth were at 6. And that was something that we had no arrests for just 2 years ago. So we're seeing a little increase, particularly in heroin, but also meth, and so I wanted you to note that. Let's take a look quickly at our frequent flyer numbers before I, again, make your eyes glaze over with too many stats. But these are the sort of frequent flyer, chronic property crime stuff that drives everybody crazy, and we've been focusing on that for a long time here in Bremerton. You can see that our trespass calls went from 14 to 38, big increase. More people are calling in to report trespass. So I'd like to see that level out a little bit, but we saw an increase there. You can see that our theft calls did go up to 58. We're going to track that and see if that continues to be a trend or not, but you can see our vehicle theft was at 10, up 1 from last year. Our residential burglary was up 1 to 8, a total of 8 for the month of February 2016. And our non-residential burglaries went down. Our vehicle prowl numbers were at 6 for the entire month of February 2016. That's a better number than we've seen. We saw a little uptick in vehicle prowls in the fall and the winter. We're seeing those trend downward, and we want to see that continue. And then malicious mischief, things like vandalism, that was at 19 for the month of February 2016. Let's talk a little bit. I'm going to show you a map here about 6th and Park, and one of the reasons that we saw some increase, and again on this program, and when I communicate with the council and communicate with you, I want to give you the real facts. We had been seeing some increase in activity around 6th and Park, and this is where our social services are centered. We have the places that feed people that are homeless or transient. We have healthcare services there. 6th and Park is simply an area where we have a really specific concentration of social services. And so we want to track that and find out how to best deal with that. And you can see, and it's kind of hard to see the map, but those numbers on that little area that is in the middle of that map is just that block around 6th and Park. It's bordered by Martin Luther King Way on the north. And you can see that this is just from the beginning of the year, from the 1st of January till the 7th of March. So a little over 2-month period. We had 11 assaults in that block, 13 criminal trespass incidents, 1 disorderly conduct. I'm not going to read these all to you. 3 mental investigations, 5 theft incidents just in that block. And most of these, including 5 arrest warrants, again, were related to individuals related to those social service agencies. We are working with them to improve the atmosphere there, to make sure that there's not a lot of activity and that this is not something permanent. So has it been a problem? Yes. Are we working on it? Yes. It is not the total responsibility of the police department. We can't solve all those problems, but the social service agencies are working with us. So just want to give you a heads up on what we're doing there. Take a couple minutes to talk about our professional standards report. This was issued in the month of March by our department. We do it every year, 13, 14, 15. We've done it 3 straight years. Really an important issue. And as you look at viral videos of police officers doing often stupid things, inappropriate things, sometimes criminal acts, you all know them. I mean, they're out there. They get a lot of media coverage. I'm not complaining. I'm just saying that that's part of the change in perspective toward law enforcement and some of the problems that we have. And I'm often asked, what do you think we should be doing about this? And what we should be doing is having really good progressive policies about use of force and pursuits, building face-to-face relationships with the community. Those things are kind of boring. They're not exciting. They don't lend themselves well to video or something that you can see on Twitter. But that's where it lives. That's where this stuff lives. And credibility and trust in law enforcement is about really good, transparent policies and communicating those with you. That's what I'm doing on this show. That's what we do in our newsletter. I will continue to do it. And I know it's not as interesting as seeing something, a chase on TV, but keep in mind this stuff matters. It's a best practice for us to be transparent about our professional standards, complaints, use of force, internal affairs investigations. And it helps us to monitor what we do, especially the high-risk stuff, uses of force and pursuits especially. And then that reporting and feedback with you as residents of Bremerton is really important. So let's take a look at a couple numbers. I'll go through these quickly. If you want more information, you want to see more, it's available on our website. You can pull up the whole report and look through every single one of these. If you can't find it or you have a problem, you have a question, let me know. I will email you back personally. We had 40 citizen complaints, which was down from 51 in 2014. We take every complaint. The old days, a lot of departments would say, well, that's a bogus complaint. I'm not going to take that complaint. We take every complaint. Even if we think it may be bogus, doesn't matter. We take them all. We investigate them all because that's a best practice. It's what you have to do. 9 of the 40 were sustained, which means they were valid complaints that we needed to do something about. That also led to 3 internal investigations. All of those were sustained. So in other words, in 2015, we did 3 internal investigations on officers. All 3 were sustained. In other words, they were found to be at fault in some way. And the discipline for those ranged from days without pay to resignation in lieu of termination, which means that the officer resigned prior to being terminated. Also in 2015, we track, and we do this each year, we track, and this is just one way to look at whether we have any kind of bias-based policing or racial profiling. It's not a perfect measurement, but it's one way to look at it, is we track the number of infractions we issue by race, and then we compare it to the demographics of the city of Bremerton. And you can see there, for example, the number of infractions on the left, the percentage of, these are traffic infractions, by race, 72.3 are issued to people that we identify as white. The city is 74% white. So is there a big variance there? 10.7% of our traffic infractions were issued to people identified as black or African American. 6.7% of our city in the most recent census is black or African American, and you can see the rest of the numbers there. So is there a big variance year to year based upon things like race? We should track that, and we need to communicate that with the community. That's what we're doing. So we go to the next slide. Let's look at pursuits. Every single pursuit results in a review by supervisors all the way up to myself as the chief. In 2014, we had 21 pursuits. 16 of those were within policy. They followed our policy. 5 were not. 5 were outside of policy. That number's pretty high, isn't it? So we looked at that and said, what do we need to change? And so we changed our pursuit policy. It is a much more restrictive pursuit policy than we used to have. In the city of Bremerton, we generally pursue someone in a vehicle only for violent felonies. That is more restrictive than most departments. But I think that that's a good policy for us. And The 21 pursuits in 14 went to 8 in 2015, and all were within policy. That's very, very important, and it's a substantial policy change, and one that you in the community should know. I'll finish it up by mentioning use of force, and again, there's a lot more information on the web if you want to look at this. The number of use of force incidents in 2015, 110. Our officers used force in an arrest 110 times in 2015. Out of 53,400 plus incidents, that is 0.21% of incidents resulted in a use of force. 1/5 of 1%. And you can see there that in those of those 110, we had 10 injuries to officers, 13 injuries to suspects, which required hospitalization 2 times on each side. So 2 officers, 2 subjects required hospitalization. Most people, when I share that, say that is much, much lower than they expected. And it generally is, and again, a lot of that has to do with really good training. A lot of it has to do with good policies and just great decision making by a lot of police officers, and it's something that we should recognize. As I wrap up, 2 quick things I wanted to share with you. The first is in the month of February, we had the dedication for the Trooper Tony Rattle Memorial Highway. If you come up Highway 16, just right when it goes into the Kitsap County, right past the Kitsap County line northbound, you'll see a sign that's just been up there now a couple of months. It says WSP Trooper Tony Rattle Memorial Highway. Trooper Tony, of course, was killed in the Gorst area on Highway 16 a few years ago, and all of us in this area, of course, remember that very, very well. The first memorial highway in the state, as I understand it, is this portion of highway, which goes all the way up into Gorst, into our area. Many of our officers responded to that shooting and, of course, knew Trooper Tony very, very well, so we were very, very pleased to be part of this. You can see Governor Inslee unveiling the sign, and we appreciate Mayor Lent and Councilmember Huddy for being at the dedication. And then finally this month, I wanted to share with you our Fuzz Fund donation for the month, and this was to the YWCA. You can see Denise Fry from the YWCA along with Officer J.D. Miller, who decided to direct funds this month to the YWCA along with myself. YWCA, a great partner with us, particularly in areas of domestic violence and working with victims and improving our response to issues of domestic violence in the city of Bremerton. Lots of information. Again, if you're interested in Neighborhood Watch, go to our website. We have all the information there. A lot to throw at you, but as always, really appreciate you joining us. We'll see you next time on BPD Update.